I would love to have a storytelling program here. And I know that it takes a lot to get up in here and speak, and I don't care what anyone tells you, no matter how long you've been doing this or how old you are, it can be scary getting up. But I think that when we tell stories about ourselves, even if it's a little story, could be about a car ride or your dog, I think that we build empathy with each other, and I think that's a really important thing, considering, there's so much divisiveness in our society now, and I think we need to come together, and I think part of the theme this year is strength and community. So I hope at some point, if we do have something, that you take a chance and get up here and just tell a little story. It doesn't have to be big, because, it has to be something that's important to you. That's all.
And thanks to the library for having this. I think this is great to have this, because this is the place where this is a sacred place. We get to share our thoughts, our feelings, our heartfelt ideas. And this is I'm just going to say a few words before we do it. This is also in honor of the Endicott Review students, and also the Endicott Writers Series, which Doug and I kind of co-explore. So several of the students here tonight have had chapbooks published, and they're going to be reading. So they're going to be our first readers, actually. But also, this is an interesting month, because first of all, today's Veterans Day. So if you have a story, you could just come up here and tell a story. You don't have to read a poem or anything like that. You could tell some story about a veteran in your family. It could be short. So today's Veterans Day. So in honor of Veterans Day, I hope someone can come up and give a story. I have a story too, if no one else does. And also, this is American Indian Heritage Month, which is interesting that today's Veterans Day and it's Native American Indian Month, because many of the Indian poems, and I say Indian because their treaties say Indian, so we want to keep that word alive. Many of their poems are from the point of view of warriors. And this is one of the books I use in class called Songs of the Dream People. And I'd say a good 25% of the poems are written by warriors. And it's usually an ode to nature and to love. So it's very interesting. So if someone would like to read and doesn't know what to read and they need something, I could point you in the right direction here. So it's Veterans Day. It's Native American Indian Heritage Month. So and it's Endicott Review Day here too. So what I'm going to do is introduce the readers, and they're going to come up individually. Now, when they read a poem or tell a story, feel free to applaud. If you don't feel like, oh, should I applaud or not? Go! Applaud! Yes! After each poem, if you want. So don't feel like you have to hold back. You can also snap your fingers, which is another form of approval, and also the writer feels good. They feel like they're communicating. And basically that's all we want to do really with literature and writing, is to make contact with another person. So we're starting tonight with the group of students who have had books published in the Young Writers Series, and also some of them are on the Endicott Review group, and we're starting with Halle Hastings. So give her a warm welcome.
Hi everybody, my name is Halle. I'm going to be reading a few of my own poems first, and then a few poems by another student named Anya, who can't make it today because she's actually studying abroad. Yeah. The first poem is called Chaos is Balance. We had traversed to the heart of the forest, became as immersed with nature as one can get, encompassed by nothing save for the golden hues of mid-October trees intermingled with scraggly barren branches shedding their leaves, which overlooked a tiny closed-in bed of water, much too small to be called a lake or classified by any means of significance. Despite the emptiness that characterized this bleak environment, you stepped up upon a little stone wall and began talking about how man strives for perfection, whereas nature strives for chaos amidst balance, explaining that the little imperfections and flaws are what make landscapes like the one in which we found ourselves entranced by stand apart for their impeccable, untouchable beauty. You then took a step back, apologized for sounding too poetic, too philosophical. But these words, upon hearing them spoken aloud, made sense to me somehow, that something could be both chaotic and balanced at the same time. This concept resonated and I understood. I took your hand, rested a head on your shoulder, to then close my eyes and breathe in the chaotic balance of our peaceful and private, untouchable world, and it seemed pretty darn perfect to me. This one's called Stained Glass. I think what is perhaps most powerful is that one single thing can instantly make you think of a certain person, and this memory will stick with you forever. It doesn't even matter how much time has passed. It could be a few months, a year, or decades later. You'll be in the car and a song will come on the radio, or you'll be on a date with someone new, watching a scene in a movie. You'll hear the sound of ocean waves, feel the breeze of a cool summer morning, or pass a stranger in a bookstore, and your mind will transport back to a specific moment of the past, a time signified by the presence of that one person. And all the emotions you've kept bottled up inside will nestle beside your heart again, illuminating the images of a story embedded deep within your soul. This one's called Strength in Numbers, and it's dedicated to my grandmother, because she actually worked in a library, so I thought it was fitting to read this today. She taught my mother how to protect her heart so she could wield it in powerful ways. She showed her the ropes of what it took to be fierce but kind and firm but gentle. She demonstrated how to cut ties with the ones that fell behind the curve while strengthening bonds with the lifelong friends who truly cared. She told her to fight for those contested beliefs, stressed that a woman's voice matters and that no other opinion can ever suppress its value. She said it was okay to flaunt a bit of sass so long as the company you kept was smart enough to receive the comments with a grain of salt and a smile. She planted these seeds of resilience, passion, and self-reliance within my mother so my mother could then teach me. And this is the last one that I will read. That's my own poem called Starlight, Star Bright. I tend to imagine that if we looked up to the stars more often, for a simple reminder that this world is bigger than our issues and bigger than the conflicts which never seem to end, society would be better off and humanity would thrive, because even if our differences threaten to divide, we could look to the sky and realize that this universe has been created for us all, and that each of us has been granted the privilege of living under it, and that there is one thing we do have in common after all. This planet is our home, and there will always be more that we can do to protect it, to cherish the good over the bad, and deliver our thanks of praise to the stars before it's too late. So now I have a few poems by student Anya Griffin, and this one's called Edwardian Summer. I spent the summer in subtle bliss, strolling from one part-time shift to the next, dancing with my toes in the sand of impermanence, knee-deep in the refreshing waves of inconsequentiality. Nights spent meeting childhood friends, legs crossed on the old seaport dock, laughing from our stomachs in the hot city air. Coming alive with a curly-headed stranger in his back seat, no talk of who we were or where we were going, just a backwards Red Sox cap and a very best bra. And everyone has always told me I should want more than this, told me that no satisfaction comes from letting the air simply flow through me, that one day I'd have to grow up and learn to cultivate every ounce of breath. And maybe it's true, but this morning when I got an email about my tuition being overdue, my throat clenched as I realized I am just 2 years away from being handed a 100,000 deed to a life I committed to when I was 17, to a life I'm not even sure I want. And as dawn goes down today, and I pack up my last teenage summer in the city, I can't help but feel like a tantruming toddler being told to leave the pool, screaming and flailing in my neon plastic floaties, begging for just 5 more minutes to splash around. This one is called South Boston. When I think of the city I knew as a child, I think of my grandmother's back deck tucked in between the triple-deckers. It was just a few potted plants, a chemtrailed square of sky, and a slice of hot city air, but it gave me hard ground beneath my feet and breath pounding through my bones. For 10 years I sat out there, a sticky cherry slush smile permanently smeared across my face, counting down the glory days while planes whirred overhead and church bells sang in the distance. My mamo and her lovely satin voice telling me stories of the homeland, Johnny next door with his midday cigarettes and his wife beaters, jump ropes and scraped knees, front stoops and the Daily Herald, boys with backward caps and mean streaks. That's all I knew of the city. That's all I knew of the world. When I turned 13, my grandmother's porch chair lay empty, a vacant throne amid the potted plants. All spring I sat out there with the geraniums and Johnny, and together we grieved as her breath, her ration of cement and air, was released back to the city. In my naivete, I could only mourn the loss at the tip of my nose. I couldn't see my mamo's vacant deck was just one of hundreds, a single drop in the wave of change washing over the city. Last year, Johnny's building was sold for close to $1 million. He had one last cigarette standing in his back door, the ashes embered in the old white dish as he blew a final stream of smoke into the July air. I watched it dance up to the clouds, spiral in the gap between the buildings, and disappear. It was a quiet tribute, a lonely goodbye. I wonder if the man who bought the apartment, a young 30-something from Rhode Island, who surfed and worked downtown, I wonder if he ever thought about the man who left the ashtray on his porch. I wonder if before investing in an urban property, if he thought about whose backs he stood on, who owned that little square of cement and sky and air before him. Because I don't always think about it when people ask me where I'm from. I don't always think about the hundreds of back decks pressed between the apartments and the generations that called them home. And how one day, when the final front stoop, when the final slice of sky is sold, the air of the neighborhood will belong to new lungs, and the city I knew as a child, for all its beauty and all its ugly, will breathe no more. And this is Anya's last poem, called Love Poem. I felt hopeless last night, scrolling through the beautiful cookie-cutter girls you held in the daylight, not just because I was jealous, but because if that's all it'd take, I know I would do it. I would dye my hair back blonde and lose the weight around my stomach. I'd perfect the way they exist, how they speak, and what they joke about, the way they never get excited. I'd keep things on the surface, tell you how hot that was after sex, not wring my body out the window, and ask if you felt as free as me. I'd never paint anything but pretty landscapes, and be the chillest motherfucker and the brand of wild people love. I would shove myself back into all of those boxes and lay my tiny shrunken frame down at your feet and forever play the part of the person you always saw yourself with. One word, and I'd do it.
Thank you, Allie, for your wonderful poems. You took us right into nature. Really beautiful. And also, thank you for reading the poems of Griffin, because she's in Italy now somewhere, and I'm
She's
sure.
our next poet.
That's right. She's the next person in the Writer's Series poems. So as we continue on, so that's how it's done, folks. It's great. And you can also come up here, just tell a story. You don't have to read a poem. So next up is Rhiannon. So thank you. Give her a good, nice welcome.
Hello, everyone. My name's Rhiannon, and I brought 3 poems for you today. And the first one is called Persephone's Promise. Buds begin to bloom on the tips of the tree branches, but even with the sun beating down on my scarred scalp, it just doesn't feel like spring. After months, I see you again when I finally stopped caring that you weren't coming back. You have a new tattoo. I haven't seen it yet. Dice, but you've never been lucky. The skin around the ink is red and painful. I want to tear it off. Here you are vulnerable, raw. I want to erase any part of you that could be art. My body shrivels into the snow piles of winter. I felt so much safer in your absence. Winter continues to rear its ugly head through your blizzards, though your blizzards still tear me down, though I'm not yet strong without you, though the dice have yet to roll in my favor. Spring is coming, and it's coming fast. And my second poem is called Death to the Idol. The fall from Olympus is a long one. Your nosedive into the dirt left your face bloody, bones broken, mangled. Still, I didn't blink. You never belonged there. I should have kept you mortal. Somehow you crept beyond my affection, built yourself a pedestal, got too comfortable there. You have never been the god you thought you were. Things can get out of hand so easy. Ask Icarus about it. I took your hubris for confidence, but you were quick to breed destruction. Columns came crashing down in your presence. Your foul-mouthed entropy ruled my halls. You used to be so much taller than me, but you can't be tall from the ground at my feet. Your notoriety has faded slowly. Graduation from infamy to disgust to obscurity. Your death will be quick. No mourners will hold candles for you. The gods will show you no kindness, and neither will I. And my last poem for today is called Burnt Out. When I was young, they said I was smart. I thought myself a child of Athena, wise beyond my years, an old soul. Old souls wither fast, break like dried petals past season. They become flammable. Sometimes they burn, but I don't remember my flame. Is there a God of wasted potential? Maybe I could pray to them instead. Offer up my jaded wisdom, rotting leaves, take them from me, please. I'm offering you up my mind. It used to be so sharp, but it's dulled over time. It's yours if you want it. I'm calling out to you now, O mighty God of wasted potential. Accept my atrophied youth, it's all that I have. I can't find Athena anywhere, and my armor does not shine like hers. Be gentle with me, please. And that's it.
Thank you, Rhiannon. The muse definitely comes down and speaks to you. And then you open your soul to us. And you always do that with a kind of a little smile. So thank you for that. Next, so we'll still continue with students who've had poems published with the Writers Group, and then with the Writers Series, and then after that we're going to open it up to the others on the list. And the next is George Rosatoe. So thank you.
I've got a very long one, so please strap in. I'm probably going to do some like stretch breaks and water breaks and stuff because, you know, we'll see how it goes. All right, this is The Corpse of Paradise. I remember well the dull sting of arrow splinters, a sharp pain you knew was to come with each pull of the drawstring, though the prospect of a hefty hair to sell defeated any pleas a bleeding finger may make. Animals were exceptionally rare in these woods, thank the gods, and I had no talents outside of the hunt, thank my father. Thus, when a fat rabbit stops to glutton itself further on the fruits of bellies, a cheap arrow splinters are a small price to pay for a chance to enact justice. With a lucky shot, this arrow would pierce the fat rabbit's head, leaving the valuable meat untouched. It looked big enough from my 100 or so steps away to be worth a trade with the blacksmith for an arrow more refined, but the luxury of a smoother shot could only come once I bought more lumber for my cottage, more coals for my fires, and more feed for the last of my dying chickens. Alas, I saw many more splinters in my future. The fat rabbit, regardless, promised a step toward change. I sucked in an optimistic breath of the warm midsummer air, closed my bad eye, and released my tense fingers. A small fire burned in them as bits of wood ripped from the flying arrow, staying behind in my skin. I glanced at my now thorned hand, making note of the same callous spots in which I would have to go digging again later. I shifted my gaze back towards the fat rabbit. It was gone. In its place sat the bent arrow, clean of any future prospects. The sound of the rabbit echoed through the leaves as it thundered its fat belly across the mossy ground in retreat. I drew another arrow, this one cheaply crafted from poor lumber and a loose yellow feather, until the drawstring came back to my fingers and waited. The thumping continued to circle through the dense trees and brush. As it began to creep its way behind me, hoping to God that it had found a safe spot, I quickly turned and released my numbing grip. The arrow disappeared through the dense trees in front of me, and a loud human yell came to me in return. Her glowing body grew warm in my arms as I ran to the nearest village, taking care not to shake the arrow I had lodged in her right foot. Through blurred vision, I could just barely make out long, dark waves of black hair that captured the morning sun and offered a slightly blinding reflection in return. With every step, the hair would briefly fall from her face and reveal her large, beautiful, wincing eyes. Below them, connected by glossy canvas of smooth skin, rested her thin lips. With each cringe from a jolt of pain, they revealed a set of grinding teeth. As we reached the path into the village, the woman, now calm from shock, told me her name was Afra. After my extensive apology, one which she scoffed at with a smile and dismissed as needless for such an accident, I gave her my name. She told me she had never met an Ivan before, but that I very much fit the role of one. Most nights, this comment still warms me. Ivan was not at all a rare name in our part of the country, especially in the more populated villages. Afra's ignorance, admittedly cutely, demonstrated a distance to the more dense pockets of people, places I had always avoided myself. Yes, they were necessary for trade, but the people were often insufferable. Too caught up in their own status and wealth, they were no better than scavengers, pecking on and gnawing at the misfortunes of the poor. Doctors were no exception, but at least they fixed her. As the doctor worked on her splinter foot, applying different herbs to ease the pain, she told me she was a poet. She often wandered the woods in search of stag, rabbits, squirrels, anything that wasn't human. In her mind, animals never wronged the gods, which made their beauty all the more divine. They were her inspiration. I asked if I had ruined the beauty of the woods for her, to which she laughed and replied that inspiration's fruits weren't always born from beauty. Over the next 3 winters, Afra and I grew close. At first, I promised to assist her in her wounded state. As she could not walk without support, I made arrangements to bring her pre-prepared meals twice a day, feed her livestock, and deliver her writings to the village theater. I even went as far as to feed the weaker of her sickening livestock widow's fern, a herb that granted a swift and merciful death. Though I was never successful in my dances with botany, she refused to let me use any sort of weapon to spare the dying creatures. Afra had a great attachment towards her animals. She, like me, lived alone, and one foot can only accomplish so much. I understood her suffering. These actions took up nearly half my days, and, as a result, half of my hunting income, though I didn't let the occasional hungry night or leak in the roof bother me. My guilt was stronger than the cursed grip of selfishness. As her foot healed some months later, I found myself remaining in Afra's company nearly every day. She didn't mind. In fact, most of my visits were at her request. He started as small jobs, an extra window installment, helping with rearranging her rather light furniture, and other mild tasks. However, once she ran out of excuses to keep me engaged, he simply began to insist on my presence. She later joked that this was to keep me from the hunt, where I may herd another inspired artist, or worse, as she would say, an animal. One night when her foot had fully developed a scar where the wound had been, she asked me to stay for dinner. A blend of various fruits, vegetables, and grains, all homegrown and prepared in a way I'd never seen before. It was wonderful. After we ate, she glanced out her new window and, in a rush, grabbed my hand. She dragged me outside and into a nearby wood, running as she did so. I wondered how her newly recovering foot could run so well, but I decided not to question it. I figured she'd just been exaggerating for a while now. I followed her blurred figure as it leaped over fallen trees, weaved through the bush, and kicked up dirt that barely missed my face. It was a struggle to move as fast as her, but I managed to keep her in my sight. The setting sun tried to wrap its piercing fingers around her as she moved, her black hair briefly consuming and reflecting the orange glow above with each gap in the tree line. I memorized these reflections long enough to keep on her trail when she would leap back into the shadow and become nothing more than a dancing silhouette. On a particularly long patch of dense trees, I lost all sight of her. Admittedly, a part of me was relieved, as I could now stop for a moment and breathe without her noticing. I wasn't afraid of losing her, nor her me. I was a hunter, after all, and her tracks were nothing if not distinguishable. I followed the sporadic blotches of kicked-up dirt for another few moments, eventually pushing through a large bush and finding myself in a wide, near-empty clearing on a hill. There was a circular bed of roses at its end, in the middle of which Afra sat, back turned to me, waiting. I imagined how from above her rich black hair could resemble the pupil of the red, rose-composed iris surrounding her. I sat next to her, following her gaze off the hill and into the landscape below. I suddenly understood her haste. At that moment, the sun had lowered itself into the horizon, kissing the surface of the far-off ocean. The ocean was dozens of miles away, but from up here one could still feel its looming power, a power that was only matched by the beauty of the water surface as it reflected the kaleidoscopic colors of a fallen god. "Isn't it divine?" Afra finally said, breaking me from my trance. "The towns have yet to dull," I responded after a moment. "No, well, yes, that, but," she said excitedly, with her eyes stuck to the view ahead. "I mean the ocean, look at it. What do you think it's like, all that power, to mother so many living, loving, warring, dying beings? I pray I can one day meet them." It surprised me that Afra had never been to the ocean, but it was not completely uncommon for people from that area of the continent. Most grow happy in their societal comforts, all too safe woods and distance from invading nations. But not Afra. She would give it all up in a heartbeat. 2 months later, when I showed her the plans I had made to build a cottage on the coast, she did just that. Later that same night, I, like the greedy bastard I am, asked for her hand in marriage. We set off the following week. The first few months were difficult. My original plans had to be tweaked countless times by the summer's end, but eventually our decently sized, multi-roomed cottage had manifested itself on the edge of the beach's sands. When she wasn't mesmerized by the ocean, Afra had helped with construction, displaying an immense amount of knowledge in the craft. Whenever she ventured off for the day, she would return with just the right amount of lumber, driftwood, or whatever else was needed for that day's addition. By the end of it, we were comfortable and happy in our makeshift house for the first few weeks. Those first weeks were more beautiful than anything I could have imagined. We spent our days scraping our feet on the hot sand, only to nurse them in the shallow tide of the ocean's waters. We ate the fruit from nearby trees, always surprised by their intense tastes. We baked fresh bread and sugars, letting the coastal air carry the scent around our home. We enjoyed the peace. Afra and I were inseparable. The gods, however, grew annoyed with our laziness. At the end of those weeks, a large storm flooded the coast. Of course, I had planned for this in my blueprints, and our home managed to survive the storm. But this was only a warning from the gods. A broken window or two and a flooded cellar served as a much-needed wake-up call that we needed to get back to work. I expected the storm to frighten Afra, having been mostly ignorant to anything sea-related, but to my surprise, she loved every minute of it, startled only when I pulled her aside from a vulnerable window. As soon as the sky cleared, she rushed to her study, and her pen ran for the rest of the night. The morning after, Afra's side of the bed was still cold. I crept over to her study door, creaking it open until I could see her sleeping, sprawled across the carpeted floor. A dry pen rested next to her, and she seemed to be using a thick stack of papers as a pillow. I nudged her awake, escorting her to bed. Leaving her, I did my best to assess the damages. Wading through the small pond of broken glass and stranded seaweed that consumed our cellar floor, I knew I would have to hunt some hefty animal to make a trip into town to cover the cost. I came back home that night with a few rabbits, a few splinters, and a few roses. I pulled the splinters from my skin, which were once again callousing after a few weeks of rest. 3 of the rabbits were placed in the ice box for tomorrow's trade, and the 4th I had put in the kitchen counter for dinner. The roses I held, carrying them with me as I moved to our bedroom, expecting to find Afra still asleep. Once again, her side was cold. I checked the study, ready to see her stranded body splayed amongst a flurry of torn and stained pages. Instead, the room was neat and lifeless. Concerned, I rushed back through the house, calling her name. Nothing. I checked the basement once more, praying the gods that she had not tried to handle the flood herself. Nothing. As a last resort, I left the house and walked the short path to our little beach. Once the trees began to clear, I saw a familiar pair of footprints in the approaching sand and sighed with relief. I thought to myself how too much relaxation had made me dull at my job, and I followed her trail. When I had finally reached the full beach, I looked out across the dark sand and the moonlight-painted water. At the water's edge sat my Afra, on her knees, crying into her hands under the moonlight shadow of a large, beached creature. It was dead, and Afra was wailing. I didn't allow myself much more than a quick glance that night. Afra's safety was my priority. However, despite my efforts, the creature's image still burned itself into my head. Afra, exhausting herself with each dry heave and sob, eventually fell asleep behind me in our bed. A shallow river of tears crept its way to me from her curled-up, shaking body. I tried to sleep, but each embrace of the night was met with the creature's image again. The body the size of a small warship, the dozens of slits on the side of its head that might have resembled eyes, the seaweed-covered gray skin that desperately clung to the last bit of moisture it had, the spiraling mess of tentacles that jutted from its base, the set of large human arms that reached from its sides, each clenching the sand below. Its image only left me with the morning sunlight behind, blinded my wide, blinking eyes. When Afra stirred awake, she coldly refused my offer of breakfast and shuffled her way to her study. The rush of air stung my tired face as the door slammed in front of it. I heard the crumpling of pages echo from the walls as I made my way through our home. The smell of rotting flesh quickly woke my senses, a smell that wasn't uncommon in my line of work, a putrid, horrible smell that would have threatened my stomach had I been able to eat the night before. I followed the scent to the rabbit I had intended to prepare for dinner the night before, shaking off a few black flies and other many-legged scavengers as I grabbed it by the ears. The decaying flesh was slippery between my fingers, the texture all too reminiscent of the image that had kept me awake the night before. I quickly ran out into the woods, tossing the animal to the ground for nature to cleanse. Fearful that I would only upset Afra more with my interruptions, I grabbed the good rabbits from the icebox and made my way into town to trade them off. I walked slowly each way. The sun had already begun its descent by the time I had made it close to home. Walking through our coastal woods, I thought of how we used to watch the strange, bastard sun collapse into the horrible ocean. I struggled to remember the beauty we saw in their embrace. After all, the sea's beauty plunged itself through my home and cost me a good day's pay. The purple sky above the trees told me that the sun was kissing the water at this very moment, something I had no desire to see. As I came to the clearing that circled our small, handmade home, I was once again stung with the sour nausea of death's stench. I looked around our clearing, hoping to find a stray animal that had considered our home a beautiful enough place to die, but there was nothing. I checked our food reserves in the cellar, thinking they had perhaps spoiled from the flood, and they were fine. Of course, I knew they would be. I knew where the smell was coming from, and I knew Afra knew it too. I didn't know how long it had been there, trapped in the house with her. One of the first things you're taught as a hunter is to never leave your dead game in the field, especially the larger ones. The stench of a dead stag could linger for hundreds of yards, cutting off any desires other prey might have to stay nearby. Prey that would soon be killed by any attractive scavengers, insects that feed on the blackening blood, desperate wolves that resort to corpses in their weakness. For some, a consciously wasted death had been known to bring bad luck, a fate that often proves worse than wolves and bugs. Regardless of my beliefs, I knew that a lack of prey and the addition of scavengers around our little home would make the already scarce woods near uninhabitable, let alone profitable. Before I committed myself to anything, I walked the short length back around our home to the front door. A gust of coastal wind followed me, shaking the trees above my head and forcing me to forfeit my lunch. I wiped my mouth, grabbed one of my untouched roses I had gotten off the floor, and crushed it into my nose. The flower's scent only barely helped to soften the wind's curse, enough for me to find the strength to close the door behind me. Panting, I allowed myself to fall to the floor and rest. Though the act made me seem weak, a part of me wanted Offer to hear, wanted her to come running out, to embrace me and attack my forehead with damp towels and soft kisses, but she never came. This thought was stolen from me at the realization that the smell was not entirely gone. Though the windows were closed, the fire burning, and the house clearly littered with various incenses, the curse was only mildly subdued. Holding the crushed petals to my nose once again, I made my way to Offer's study. To my surprise, I was met with a barely opened door. The smell was stronger here. I hesitated before opening. Once again, the creature began to take control of my thoughts, though admittedly, it had yet to leave. The thought of coming home to my wife had managed to repress it enough, not much more than a lingering ache, but now it was back. The slits of lifeless eyes seemed to look right through me as I spotted on the beach. The once beautifully gray, near translucent flesh began to blacken and decay as the bastard sun cooked the corpse throughout the day. The tangled mess of tentacles remained knotted and stuck as they grew hot in the sun's rage. The creature's hands, once desperately clutching the sand, appeared to loosen as the muscles in its fingers were seared beyond use. Through it all, the kneeling Ofra turned to meet my gaze, herself catching on fire as she did so. I screamed, grabbing the door handle in front of me and forcing myself to enter her study, shaking off the nightmare and praying for the best. But Ofra was fine. Her beautiful black hair again reflected the sun's rays as she sat, staring out of her open window. Though blocked by trees, her view faced the ocean, and her stubborn eyes remained fixed on the descending sun. With each breeze that pushed her flowing hair behind her, in came the increasingly sour stench. I rushed to her, quickly closing the window and wrapping her again in my arms. Her unblinking eyes remained fixed on the glass in front of her for a moment, before she was quickly broken from her trance by my touch. She slapped me. I revolted, and she slapped me again. Turning my stinging face to meet her eyes, I saw them begin to glisten before she crumbled, throwing herself onto me. "What did it do?" she screamed in my ear through a fit of choking sobs. "What did it do? What 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 did it do?" Offer fell asleep later that night. I closed our bedroom as best I could, sticking cloth beneath the window sills and door frames and lighting incense by her bedside. I waited until I could feel her sleeping breath's rhythm, creeping out of the room once I could confirm her slumber. Leaving the heaven that was our bedroom, I was immediately knocked back again by the curse in the air. Moving through the dark house, I closed every window, burned every incense, and crushed every rose left. Finally, making my way to the last corner of the house, I peered into Ofra's study. The window was open again, its curtains rhythmically brushed by the moonlight breeze, a breeze that turned my stomach with each gust. I pushed the window down, jamming its crevices with the loose ends of the curtain. The moon watched me as I did so, granting me the light to see as I worked to counter the sun's damages. Delaying the inevitable even further, I walked about in Ofra's study, admiring the reflections of a wife I longed to see again. Making my way to her desk, itself in shambles, I cautiously flicked my fingers through her current manuscript. I'm losing it. The current manuscript. Careful not to move anything out of place, the first of the pages read Paradisets Leak, followed by dozens of black, handprint-stained pages filled with writing scraps and jittered lines. Unlike Ofra, who was taught since birth, I never learned to read Swedish. The only familiar aspects of these pages was their form. It was poetry, and a lot of poetry. More than I had ever seen her attached to one project. I was proud of her, though I knew not what any of it meant, and I unwillingly resisted the nagging urge of curiosity. I couldn't ask her about what it meant, not that she seemed finished anyways. Still, the progress she made reminded me of the creative, beautiful Ofra I found wandering in the woods a lifetime ago. I kept her image at the forefront of my mind and left for the cellar. I knew it had to be done. The keg of oil felt surprisingly light in my grip. Despite my lack of sleep and my inability to keep much food down, I was able to carry the keg up the cellar and comfortably roll it down the path to the beach. I fixed my eyes on the rolling keg, watching its wooden shell pick up damp clumps of dirt as it pushed forward. The occasional smell of loose oil became addicting. I found myself kneeling down and consuming as much of the scent as I could, letting it burn my nose and mask the smell of the rotting corpse ahead. Eventually, the rolling barrel that demanded my sight crossed the threshold to the beach's sands. I stopped its movement, admiring the soft glisten of the tiny, speckled pebbles in the moonlight. If it weren't for the stench, I'm sure I would have remained staring at those pebbles until sunrise. Instead, the image of Ofra's once graceful figure leaping through the trees passed my mind, and I found the courage to look up and move forward. The creature looked worse than I thought. Its eye slits, once masking the windows behind them, were forced open with the flowing sludge of the melted contents within. Its glistening skin, now black and green and rotting, loosely hung from its body as the stronger of its bones began to pierce through. Flies, maggots, and more of the early scavengers gnawed at its tentacles, dancing through the crevices and maze-like knots that they formed. The melting hands fused with the sand below, creating small puddles where the once distinguishable human-like figures grasped at the pebbles. Disgusted, weak, and horrified, I threw the keg at the creature, watching as hundreds of insects exploded from the corpse in retreat. As the barrel rolled back my way, the sloshing oil within echoed in my ears, and it reminded me of my mission. I unscrewed the bung, painted the corpse in more black sludge, and finished the job that the bastard son had so clumsily started. When I made it back home, I saw an all-too-familiar glow in the window to office study. The moonlight poked its way through the glass, reflecting off the light-sensitive black hair and stinging my dark-adjusted eyes. Through the small glimpses of clear vision I was allowed, I managed to catch Ofra's glare. Even without the fire on the horizon behind me, her eyes would be burning all the same. I barely managed to shuffle through the front door before she lunged at me. I didn't see what was in her hand, but I heard the familiar thud of something sharp piercing the wooden door behind me. I used this brief misstep to my advantage, grabbing her shaking body and holding her to the ground. Her tears splashed on my arms as she fought. "I need to know you won't hurt me," I calmly told her, holding back tears of my own. She stopped her struggling, allowing me to feel her muscles relaxing against my tightened ones. Moving a loose hand down my arm, she grabbed my right hand and flipped it over in the moonlight so the palm would face us. She traced her fingers across the calluses that had begun to form at the base of my fingers. She gave a faint sting when she applied pressure, evidence of a splinter or two I had missed. "Don't worry," she began to softly say in my ear, in the sweet voice I had longed to hear since the curse washed ashore. "I'm not like you." With that, she stood and began her slow shuffle into the darkness of our bedroom. I watched her silhouette against the moonlight before her figure disappeared behind our bedroom door. I turned my head toward her open study door, looked past the piles of loose pages and ink bottles. Out the study window, past the tree line, was a faint orange glow. It challenged the moon's dominance in the dark, even going so far as to mask his light with a plume of rising smoke. Smoke I could faintly smell through the still slightly open front door. I pulled myself to my feet, closing the door as I did so. With a bit of force, I managed to dislodge the blood-stained arrow that had been jabbed in its frame. I rubbed its yellow feather between my fingers before throwing it to the ground. Ofra was already asleep. Crawling into the sheets beside her, I tried to match my movements to her rhythmic breathing. I knew she needed the sleep. With the stench gone, we could finally rest. With the body in ashes, we could finally live again. And I fell asleep quickly that night. The stag's antlers managed to earn me enough coin to pay for the needed glass to fix the windows in the cellar. I had little experience with so fragile material, and with near nothing I could sell to afford a replacement, I cradled my new purchases for the few miles it took me to take them back home. Even in her wounded state, she hobbled on. Sorry, there's a break here. I woke up from my dream the next morning expecting, perhaps foolishly, to find my heaven at my side. Instead, I was met with the familiar cold of the empty sheets. Allowing myself some more rest, I finally rose from our bed an hour or so later. Shuffling out of our room, I noticed Ofra's study door was still open from the night before. She wasn't inside. I called her name, expecting a response from the kitchen, and was greeted with the same silence I had grown accustomed to in those last couple days. It took me a moment to realize that our front door, the one with the new hole at around my height, was left open. I wasted no time in my sprint towards the beach. The one small, foot-sized indent in the dirt near our home told me all I needed to know. She came this way sometime in the night. The fire may still have been burning, or worse, it had stopped prematurely and the moonlight scavengers had begun their feast. Stray branches whipped my face as I ran. Feeling the sand beneath my feet and the sun on my face as I broke the tree line, I let out an obvious sigh of relief. Ofra was in one unburnt piece. She lay, curled in the sand, surrounded by the bone monoliths from the creature's burnt skeleton. What I supposed to be its rib cage jutted irregularly from the sand, complemented by the similarly charred skull at their front. I walked slowly around its rows of small teeth as I approached my wife. I kneeled down, placing my hand on her pale shoulder before speaking her name. My hand revolted at the coolness of her skin. Under the bone shadows, hidden from the sun, there was no warmth to her touch. Refusing to touch her again, refusing to look at her again, I trained my eyes on the ocean's distant waves and called out her name. She said nothing. I screamed her name. She said nothing. And feeling a drop of ocean-like water run down my cheek, I continued to scream as I grabbed her pale shoulder once more and turned my wife to face me. On her lips, between wincing teeth, were the chewed remains of widow's fern. Her large, unblinking eyes stared aimlessly through me, refusing to catch my gaze as she had so expertly done hundreds of times before. Her warm, glowing body now felt heavy and dull in my hands. Even her hair, which was so often reflected nature's attempts to capture it, now hung warm and tangled, no better than a clump of seaweed left to cook on the sun-bleached sand. I moved my roughed hands across her smooth ones, praying that they would once more grasp mine and ease my worries. Though I knew from the moment I touched her, it took me hours to realize that she was dead. As the afternoon sun shifted the bone shadows and began to warm her lifeless flesh, I slowly placed my heaven back down into the sands and rose to my feet. A small black fly circled my vision, only dissuade when the coastal breeze began its journey inland. With this, I rushed back to our home, removing my boots and descending into our flooded cellar. I grabbed a large keg and watched it roll down our beaten path back to the coast. The scavengers couldn't take my heaven. That's it.
Well, welcome back, everybody. Gosh, thank you for taking to that world of bow and arrows and bat rabbits and H.P. Lovecraft a little bit there. Thank you for that. Wow. So we have one more person who had a book published through the Writers Series, and then we're going to get to the open reading. And also, if you still want to read, there's still room, so you're all welcome. So right now, I'd like to introduce Kobe. Kobe, come on up here. Kobe with the beard.
Hey, y'all. All right. So, okay. The short story I'm reading is called The Permanent Ramifications of a Temporary Rainstorm Over Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, Years Prior. Because you get points if the title's longer. The brick wall across from the hospital window he was waiting next to had been haphazardly splashed red, and people were milling about it. He and everyone on the outside all shared the same thought process. What must it take to die like that? While he continued staring, he heard vaguely through his right ear, which was angled away from the large bay windows, the sounds of idle chatter and bodies being summoned from behind the large oak doors, vague jumbles of names that bounced off of the bright white tile and slipped into his brain, then, just as quickly, dripped out of his temple, never to return. Sorry. As he was looking out the window, he put his thumb and index finger on each hand in such a position so as to form half of the possible corners of a rectangle. He squinted an eye and positioned the shape over the wall, covering up the people observing from both sides. He couldn't remember the name of that ink blot test that those suited folks gave you, the suited folks that tell you how your childhood is adversely affecting your day-to-day. Though he was unable to recall the name of that test, he thought that this abstract splash of crimson upon the faded red of the bricks looked very much like that. He heard his name then, the deep voice of the man that claimed to be his son. "Okay, Dad, it's time to go. Doctor says she wants you back in 2 weeks for another checkup, okay?" The old man nodded idly, not losing his vision of the wall. "What are you doing?" the younger man said to him. He saw the wall then. Oh dear. Shame what the world is coming to, though I suppose there are worse places for it, across from a hospital, huh? It has to be someone's lucky day. The last sentence came out through young, grinning lips, though the older man still didn't turn away. Young hands tapped old shoulders, which was the cue to get a move on. When they emerged into the fall air, the crowd at the wall was moving along, and soon this day would be a memory of a memory. The world was beginning its yearly decay, and the one called father noticed the first raindrops then. A twinkling on his nose at first, and then a repetitive patter on the rapidly opening umbrellas and parking meters. The older man didn't mind, though. He loved the rain. It reminded him of a day long before, a day he assumed was in his youth. The blacktop only darkened further as the storm rapidly rolled over. It was early summer then. The scent of young lilac and the sound of the clouds rumbling filled the once young man with an unplaceable sense of comfort. This day was home once. The way that the sky had become congested with gray clouds of multiple shades and eventually filled to burst, drowning a constantly growing earth, filled him with the familiarity. These summer rains lasted only long enough for one to take in the small beauties that came with them. The droplets parading through the leaves and onto the cobblestone paths sounding very much like drums, rapidly beating a rhythm that pulled the sun through the sky behind the curtains of gray. God, the once young man loved the rain. "You know, I offered to get you your umbrella, Dad. You're far too stubborn, but now we both know whose intuition to trust, huh?" The father felt vaguely like he was being patronized. He also felt, distantly, that he should be offended by that, but his brain was rolling down the faded marble stairs of days long gone, days that would soon be even farther from reality than they are. Stairs that were beginning to crack at the corners. He couldn't bring himself to speak. He couldn't combine the right letters and words to form the correct sentences that properly enunciated that he felt very much like he was drifting through the late afternoon of his life, unable to tell which direction would lead him properly. "You're quiet today. Is everything okay?" The old man felt and knew that the now young man was reaching out to him, attempting to guide him the right way. The now old man nodded and smiled, happy to enjoy the rain, not able to place where the impending sense of dread began. It was building like bile right above his stomach, a wave of shadow crawling with thousands of hangnails into his brain, kidnapping familiarity, murdering reason, eviscerating personhood. He recognized the man next to him, didn't he? He recognized the younger man's nose because it was his. He also noted the way the younger man's hair curled at the base of his neck, a trait that they shared when reviewing the younger photos of the now old man. The streets were coded now. The old man loved the rain, however. His mind went backwards then, a vision of a vision. The storm was quick that day. There were black spots growing and breathing next to the clouds, but the once young man didn't mind. The rain still jumped from branch to branch. The ground still held drums. The rhythm remained, but the drums were distant now. The ground swallowed them, it seemed. They were echoes. No, they were echoes of echoes. A sound bounced off of the wall of the old man's brain, lighter and less perfect. There was less harmony. This made the old man sad. The memory was dripping. It was losing color. It was losing focus. The gaps in the brain, in his brain, were becoming larger. The dread was back. The scraping of muddy fingernails were picking away at the memory. The scraps were falling like leaves past the old man's outstretched fingers. The memory was eating itself. It seemed to him that his mind was eating itself. The sky folded. The drums remained discordant and sparse. The old man stepped back into the rain, pounding his thinned hair. He had been asked a question. The now young man was staring at him, slightly frowning, though the now old man was unsure of why. Maybe age had weathered the definition of recognition. Maybe the clouds would clear. What's on your mind, Dad? You stopped walking and you're going to get soaked. The older man just grinned. The face of the young man staring at him held no rhyme, no reason, though he did recognize how large the young man's nose was, which made him chuckle. Something funny? The older man heard drums. He felt the rain tickling his upturned palms. He looked upwards. The fall was here. The old man loved the rain.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Kobe, for that. The now old man, the now young man, the old man loved the rain. However, that was great. Thank you. Oh, I was looking on the list and I saw there was another student here who was also was in the writers series and had a book published. So we're going to go to Megan. There you are.
I'm going to read a goofy little short story that I wrote last year called U.S. Government. Nora enters her dim college town apartment. She squints as she flicks on the weak yellow lights, her eyes having just adjusted to the darkness of the night. She rubs at them, imagining all the words she had read for the past 6 hours falling out like tears. This makes her stop and instead toss her keys into a chunky ceramic mug by the door. Her apartment isn't nearly as warm as the library, and she quietly wonders if maybe it would be worth it to just move in there instead. Then she'd get a few extra hours of studying on top of the 36 she's already done this week. Nora smiles at the thought, but it doesn't last long. At the far end of the stout apartment is a sitting area with a lumpy purple couch, beige carpet, and a flimsy table where 4 former presidents of the United States sit. Bill Clinton slaps his thighs and stands in greeting. "Nora, you're back. How was your evening? Did your studying go all right?" Nora grabs at the straps of her backpack, almost protectively, although she can't say she feels particularly frightened. The men may have been strange, but they weren't unfamiliar. Yeah, it was good. Franklin Delano Roosevelt suddenly leans forward and places his hands carefully on the table. His face is wide, with stern brows, but his eyes seem kind. "Do you feel prepared for your test tomorrow?" "I think so." Nora goes to shrug, but thinks better of it. Her eyes drift over to William Howard Taft, who, unlike the other 3, sits inside of his notorious bathtub rather than at the table. His round chest gleams under the lights, and his waxy mustache drips water. "Let me guess, you've already forgotten about me." Taft sulks. Just a subpar president who got stuck in the bathtub. The other men avoid eye contact. Nora tilts her head. "I heard that was just a rumor." "It was, I would never." John F. Kennedy stands then and moves around the table, inclining his head like a puppy or a man with something smart to say. "Do you know what time it is, Nora?" She glances at her watch. 3:13 a.m. She offers a small shrug. The books in her backpack feel heavier now, pushing her feet into the floor. When she blinks, she feels the burn of hours staring at a computer screen. "It's Wednesday night, isn't it?" FDR says. "You have an exam tomorrow," Taft shouts. "The early bird catches the worm, Nora," Clinton winks. "Shouldn't you be going to bed?" The voices of 4 presidents echo in Nora's ears, leaving behind a faint ringing. They gaze at her as she finally drops her backpack on the floor. She unzips it, for a moment considering pulling out her massive U.S. government textbook to bring into bed with her as one final stand against her exam tomorrow. But the incessant twitching of Taft's mustache stops her. "Fine, I'm going." Nora puts up her hands in mock surrender. That's my girl, Clinton grins. Sleep well, Nora, JFK says. She nods, but pauses for a moment in the hallway, looking between the men in her living room. You're not going to give me any of the answers, are you? She asks. Roosevelt smiles, but his words are final. This is the answer. Nora slides into bed, her body weary after a night of what has felt like battle. She drifts off almost immediately into a dreamless sleep. She must have decided somewhere deep inside of her that she'd seen enough ghosts for one night.
Review, and all of you should submit your pieces to the Endicott Review. So, as we're moving on here, let's see. The next is Arden.
Hello. So I just have a short story. It's called Gateway. It was last year, somewhere around November, I think. Oh, if you can think back even further, it was a really mild summer. I guess that was God's way of telling us to prepare for one hell of a harsh winter. Nellie was perfect. She had always been such a great kid, such a great student. She never gave us trouble when she was young. Well, for the most part, at least. I mean, she was like any kid, right? All kids are a bit odd. Oh, she used to love to play hide and seek. She'd sometimes get confused and not tell us she was playing. Mark and I would get a proper fright thinking she'd run away or that something had happened, only to find her hiding in the laundry or the cupboard an hour or two later. I mean, she grew out of it. Thankfully, she grew out of it. Imagine trying to find a 16-year-old hiding somewhere around town. November, right. Her grades were always great before. She got A's and B's, well, at least for the classes she liked. Our classes and English classes, oh, little Nell always had hundreds all the way up to high school. Even did really well on one of those AP tests. Which one was it, Mark? Literature and composition? No. It was language and composition. Yeah, she got a 5 on it, and we were so proud of her. Her grades in the other classes were less than stellar, but she was a teenager. You can't expect them to be perfect or anything. She was focusing her efforts on what mattered to her, even if it brought her GPA down a touch. Yes, sorry. In November, Mark and I started noticing that we weren't seeing as much of our Nell as we usually did. She would stay out all day or shut herself in her room. I mean, she was always in her room. She was an introverted kid. She used to shut herself in her closet with a book and a flashlight and read all day, our little bookworm. We were worried because she never really had any friends until sophomore year of high school. Sorry. She seemed to be content with that, but I know how public school can be. It's hell if you find yourself low on the totem pole. Hell. But she made a friend. Nellie and this boy, Travis, got really close by junior year. I liked him at first. He was such a sweet boy, and he had these big brown puppy dog eyes. He was always nice to Mark and I, but around November was when there seemed to be a shift in Nell. She was never here, always on a different planet. I assumed this was her being smitten for Travis. To my knowledge, she had never had a crush before. I would have known, too. She used to tell me everything. I think. Either way, Nell was always out with Travis. She'd come home late a lot. She started locking herself in her room and blasting absolutely horrid music, if you can even call it that, whenever she actually was home. It was like we were living with a death metal ghost. It was almost Christmas time, when I was taking out the trash and the bag ripped open and spilled onto the driveway. I had grabbed gloves and a new bag to clean up, and while I was picking up the trash, I found a few bright blue and yellow tube things that I had never seen before. I asked Mark if he knew what they were, and that was when I realized that Nellie was doing some things that were really not okay. Mark told me it was a vape, that he had seen them with the cigarettes whenever he buys his scratchies. Oh, I didn't know what to do. I couldn't really believe my baby girl was smoking or vaping or whatever. She was 16. I didn't even understand how she could even have gotten them. You have to be 21 to smoke. Then I realized that she had started acting funny when Travis had entered the picture. Oh boy, was I mad. Well, you wouldn't have been able to tell by how Nell reacted. God, it was like she was already gone and I didn't even do anything. What kind of mother just watches her daughter fade away like that? By the beginning of February, Nell had lost weight, and Mark and I barely ever even saw her. She was really a ghost at that point. Even the obnoxious music was gone, replaced by silence. Whenever we did catch a glimpse of our daughter, she was just not there, leaving, texting, going from locked bathroom to locked bedroom. No matter how much we tried to get through to her, we couldn't. We didn't know what to do. We started getting phone calls from the school saying that she had been skipping a lot of classes or even whole days at a time, and that if she kept it up, she wouldn't be able to graduate. Our little Nellie not graduate? That was impossible. She'd always dreamed of getting into Emerson and studying English and art. She could never decide which one she wanted to be her major and which to be her minor. She had so much ahead of her. I can't. Mark, can you finish? No? Okay, just a minute. Look, I can't really get into this. I'm sorry. I'll do my best to get across what I need to. In April, Nell came home in April 8th. She never came home. And this had happened a few times before, so we gave it a day and then called the police. We filed a missing persons report, told them that the last person she had been with was Travis, who had picked her up on that last day. Told them he was in her grade, and oh God, they eventually came to us and they said that there wasn't any Travis at the high school that matched his description, and that they thought he was some older guy who had been fooling us. What, honey? Oh, right. We did think it a bit odd, how built Travis was for a boy, but Nell had originally told us he was on the football team. We never thought more of it. We never thought he was pretending to be a boy. We never thought that our baby was running around with some adult thug. We had no idea what happened to our little girl. Nellie never came home. We searched her room. We found a lot of nasty things, not just the vapes, but we found marijuana, tequila, and cocaine. Oh God, our little girl had fallen into such a dark place and we didn't do anything to help, and then it was too late. They found her almost a week later. They found her in that Travis in a motel room over an hour away. They both overdosed on sleeping pills. The police said that they had done it together while high beyond measure based on the myriad of other drugs in the room.
Thank you, Arden, for that little piece of reality. Happens every day. Thank you. So we have a few more, and we're going to go to my colleague right now, who also, we work on the Young Writers Series together, and Doug Holder is going to read something to you right now. Thank you. Doug.
So, I'm going to read a sad poem. My wife passed away in August, and so I wrote a poem about my last time with her. It's called Little Animals. The last talk we had, I put on my fantasy cat voice. Her mouth gasping for air, that halo of gray hair. We had a cast of characters, an effete French beauty living in Nice, a Boston hardscrabble alley top cat who had a certain rakish charm, but who could never bring her to his mangy arms. Her mouth gasping for air, that halo of gray hair. My cat voice started to break apart. Both cats told her that they were sorry to see her leave. Her mouth gasping for air, that halo of gray hair. A nurse checked her pulse and she was gone. A wind from the pond blew in the room and carried her away to an impossible blue and fragrant sky. And that's the way she died, that halo of gray hair floating in the air. Bickford, I had a book out a year or two ago called The Essential Doug Holder. I know it's a modest title, but my publisher insisted on that. But it was about Allen Ginsberg, who I always liked his poetry, his beat poetry, and I took a line from his poem, Kaddish, I believe it was. Or no, it could have been from Hal. I can't remember which one. I think it was from Kaddish. And he used eating grief at Bickford's, which was a restaurant, like a cafeteria-style place in New York, where a lot of the beat poets hung out and artists and cheap meals and stuff. So it's eating grief at Bickford's for Allen Ginsberg. No, there are no places anymore where I can sit at my threadbare table, pick at the crumbs on my plate and wipe the white dust from my pitch black shirt. The old men who used to spout Marxist rants from the cracked porcelain of their cups are gone. The boiling water, ketchup soup, the mustard sandwich they used to relish, all that so lean cuisine. Oh, hunchback in the corner, your lonely reflection in the glass of water, and Tennessee Williams Blanche eyes me through her grilled cheese. Pass the sugar, sugar, she teases. Maynard, the queer, late-night security guard, his policeman's hat draped on his head, looking like a sacrilegious rake, his countless renditions of defending his honor in the amorous, crazed embraces of muscular young men, how he protests. Too much, too much. The discarded men, blue blazers shedding their threads, outcasts with newspapers, stains of baked beans on the lapels, finger a piece of passionless cod, lulled by their own murmur. Thank you.
Thank you, Doug, for sharing that with us, and especially the poem about Diane. Thank you. We have a few more, and I'd like to introduce someone who I've never heard him read before, but tonight's the night, and he says he's going to read a jazz poem, and it's Bill.
It's a pleasure to be back at Endicott College, where I used to be a teacher many years ago. It sure has changed. It's where I met Doug Holder. I would like to read the blog post. Would that be okay? Yeah, okay. So I wrote a poem, and I put it on the end of this blog post. You'll see what it's about. I visited Somerville. By the way, you published it in your blog, Innocent Street Press. I visit Somerville about twice monthly to attend a bi-monthly live meetups of our little group of poets and writers known as the Bagel Bards. We meet now in the basement of Panera Bread in Porter Square, windowless, airless space with piped-in music. What it lacks in charm, we more than make up for with heaping portions of poetry, camaraderie, and bonhomie. Today was exceptional, and the poems read were even better than they usually are. A very special start to what turned out to be a very special, enchanted day. Poems were read by a few bards, including Neil Kay, who has never gotten off the bus, a reference to Ken Kesey. Neil is a Harvard man whose roommate was the Unabomber. He arrived at the Bards sporting a wig, kind of trashy, dippy thing which made him look like he is, marvelous and ridiculous at the same time, but not in a bad way, not bad at all. He is our court jester, our merry prankster, and he takes his role most seriously. It's hard to describe Neil, tall, handsome, disheveled, but stylishly, or his poetry, which is a clever mix of wordplay, Kabbalah, politics and society, neologisms, do you understand me, and all sorts of strange allusions and random thoughts that tend to cohere into mini masterpieces, which we are treated to on a weekly basis, bi-weekly basis. It's not easy for a poet to make an entire room roll with laughter by reading a poem, but Neil managed to do it that day with exceptional skill. After a round of applause, he was succeeded by his friend Tomas O., who followed this hard-to-follow act with two poems of his own, which bore the indelible mark of the wit and wisdom of this great Irish-American master of the art form. Again, full-throated laughter rising from the tables, jam-packed with versifiers, people who know a good poem from a bad one, and whose spontaneous appreciation is the gold standard. Others read too. Nina about Spain and a funeral. David D. and Jonna M. read. Doug Holder read a sad and graceful poem, and David P. Miller read a poem from his new book, In the Bend of the Stairs, in which he riffs on Googling his name and finding multiple David Millers. Hilarious, but also very skillful. It was absolutely amazing to be surrounded by so much talent, so much love of language, so much good humor and friendship. So I hope you get the idea that poetry can be a lot of fun even when you get old. Having drunk my fill of poetry, we wandered over to the small bookstore, the Lost Bookshelf, run by our friend and fellow bard Gloria M., who is closing up shop and selling books for $1 each. Of course, I was there with bells on and also with a heavy heart that this art center, a former armory, was taken over by eminent domain by the city of Somerville, and many long-established businesses run by local residents are now leaving. I walked away with 3 bags full of books, but Gloria would not let me pay for them because I am a fellow bard. I wished her the very best, and she's determined to make the best of it all, as she will continue to publish writers from far and wide in her Cervena press, along with her own poems, a recent collection of which, entitled Ash, has been winning prizes left and right. As I wandered out of the bookstore, musicians were playing in a cafe, also in the armory, and I just had to drift in and listen to them. It was a duet of piano and bass guitar, and they were playing old standards like Love for Sale and Autumn in New York. So there I was again, surrounded by music and art and books and eating lunch at a cafe listening to this live jazz, a short walk from my house. These musicians were elder statesmen, sporting beards and the look and habits of old jazzers, real hepcats. They appreciated my applause, and when I finished my lunch, I offered to read them a poem I had recently written about a jazz musician I once knew when I was a college student at Rutgers Newark campus. They, of course, knew his name and kept interrupting my poem with sighs of recognition and when famous names or places were mentioned. I was happy that they listened and gave me such an enthusiastic reception. Poetry read on the spot to strangers willing to listen is not an everyday occurrence. But it happened to me today, the day I wrote this, a day which left me with a distinct impression that I too was on the bus. The poem is called For the Sake of Such Memories. Leafing through books in Gloucester to select those that stay from those that go back to Somerville, I chanced upon a history of Newark nightlife, 1925-1950. I would have placed it in the box to go, but I thought to look up a name of a gentleman I once met in a New Jersey park long ago, where he played his trombone under a spreading elm tree on Eagle Rock, all alone, while our jejune flock picnicked on a hot summer's day. The entry in the book for Moncur Gretchen was not about him, the avant-garde trombonist, Gretchen Moncur III, but about his father, a string bassist who played all over town with his half-brother, Al Cooper, who led the Savoy Sultans. Then a list of vocalists with whom he had recorded rolled out like pinballs, hitting their marks in my memory. Household names I could hear clear and distinct in my mother's voice. Mildred Bailey and Red Norvo, Billie Holiday and Johnny Hodges, Mary Lou Williams and Bunny Berrigan. Musicians my mom saw close up and personal in jazz joints on 52nd Street and other enchanted spots. Eddie Condon's, the Three Deuces, Jimmy Ryan's and the Onyx Club, the Savoy Ballroom, the Eagle Bar. Those Jersey girls did not have far to go in search of bebop and dancing, and for the sake of such memories, I placed the book back on the shelf. Thank you.
Thank you. Mary Lou Williams. Bill, you are on the bus. You are on the bus. All right. So I'll just tell you who's coming up. We've got Timmy J, then Sydney, then Joe G, and then Casey. So you're all here, and you're hanging in there. So I'd like to introduce someone who's probably going to read the best poem he's ever written, Timmy J.
Don't let the title fool you. Or don't let his introduction fool you. So this is, I have 3 poems today, but the first one, right after my grandmother passed away, I wrote it because I wasn't feeling so hot, and next Wednesday it's being published in the Somerville Times. So that's just such a blessing for me to be able to do for my grandma. So it's called When You Lose a Best Friend, because that's what she was like to me. When you lose a best friend, it's like your anchor is being ripped out of the bottom of the sea, and you're off to float, alone, isolated. The cold wind blowing, howling like a lone gray wolf. It's like a part of you is gone, like some sort of magic trick. Your heart is broken, shattered into a million pieces. There's something missing inside of you, but there is a light at the end of the hallway. It is a long walk, but when you reach that light, you know you're ready to go back into the world, to be somebody else's light. It will still hurt on birthdays, holidays, random days while walking down the street. Your heart will sink when you think of them. You will get out your phone to tell them the good news and realize they aren't there. You want one more conversation, one more laugh, one more smile, one more hug. It may seem like they are gone, but they are looking down on you, protecting you, loving you until you meet again. The next one I have was a free write. I'm in search of my missing sister. I'm in search of my missing sister. It's been 4 years since she disappeared through the depths of New York City. 1 second holding my hand, and the next, the tight, firm grip from her small hand loosens. My intuition spiked. I looked to my left and didn't see the brownish, blonde-haired, innocent-faced 4-year-old girl. Someone my mom trusted me with, a 24-year-old. I should have been carrying her, but she insisted on holding my hand like a big girl. She should be running around on the playground, playing tag. She should be eating a PB&J with the crust cut off, just like an 8-year-old girl. She should be asking me for help with lawn division. It's getting colder out. 56 days until Christmas, I can hear her saying. She should be belting Christmas music in September. Why don't you just give up, inconsiderate so-called friends have asked. I can't just sit around and do nothing, like that day. I stood there, frozen. My shoes were glued to the sidewalk. My voice broke as I shouted, "Ansley!" repeatedly. But that's all I did, all I could do. I sprinted to the police station instead of sprinting to find her. What if we had walked another way? What if we stayed home and watched Mickey Mouse? What if I went into work on my day off? What if I ran after her? And then so this last one, we talked about heartbreak earlier, so I wanted to bring some love into this. It's called You Cannot Escape My Love, which was also a free ride. He's got so many good ideas. You cannot escape my love. It all started when we met. The second I saw you, drenched from the rain, begging for shelter as you pounded on my door. From there I asked you out. I could tell you were hesitant. But then we went on the Ferris wheel, and almost like something out of a movie, we stopped at the We stopped at the top. You kissed me. My heart skipped a beat, and then I kissed you back. Years later, we moved away to college, 587 miles away. Every time we got home, we would spend every second together. I saw your face light up at the sight of me. I did the same. I'm going to fight for you, even when I'm mad at you. When I'm tired, I'll love you. When I'm hangry, I'll love you. When I have a bad day, I'll love you. Oh, come on. I can't wait to start a family. If it's a boy, let's call him Teddy. No, Gary, after your dad. I know he'd love that. We'll have 4 kids. They will grow up. First, they will walk for the first time. Then they will be potty trained. Then they will go to the first day of kindergarten. Then they will head on to middle school. They're going to hit puberty. They're going to meet someone. They're going to meet the one. We'll go to their wedding. They will have, oh my goodness. They will have kids. That makes us grandparents. We're going to love it. Meanwhile, we will grow old. We will retire because our bucket list, Meanwhile, we will retire. Check off our bucket list because we have too much time on our hands. We will move to South Carolina because the people there are so nice. Then we'll hit our 70s, 80s, and 90s. Then we'll die. But through it all, you cannot escape my love.
Thank you, Timmy J. You are on the bus, too. You're on the bus. And all that is going to happen to you. Every bit of it. So be prepared. Maybe not South Carolina, but be prepared. Thank you for that. And now, next we have a few students, some more students from my classes. Sydney, where's Sydney? Where are you? All right, Sydney.
Disclaimer, I walked in and Professor Sklar's like, "Hey, you're reading." I was like, "Okay." So here I am. All right, so this first one is called The Killer and I. It's a short story, very, very short. It's 2 paragraphs that I wrote during free writing class. So, you know those times when you tell a story and realize you did something illegal and can't finish it? That was this. So I leave the rest of it out of the story. If I said it, I'd be outing myself and my friend. We wouldn't just be arrested, we'd be suspects for murder. But what do you do when you come across a killer in the woods? He caught us. He said he'd kill us if we told. So we had to keep our mouths shut. And I told a different story. The cut on my head was from tripping and falling down a hill in the woods, and not a reminder to keep my mouth shut. The blood on our clothes was my own, and not the dead boy's when we helped move the body. The dirt under our fingernails was from catching myself when I fell and my friend helping me up, and not from burying the dead boy. Luckily, it was a gray, rainy day. Our story wouldn't hold otherwise. Dirt wouldn't stick to us if it was sunny. It's been a week, and they still haven't caught the killer. I see him every day on my walk to school, hiding in plain sight. He buys flowers for his wife like a good husband would do. He feeds the stray dogs on the side of the street like a good man would do. He smiles and chats with the locals like a good citizen would do. And yet he kills. When I see him now, I look down. I avoid his eyes. I've started taking a different route to school, anything to avoid him. Where others see a kind, cheerful man, I see the hatred, the evil, the killer hidden inside him. And yet he smiles.
Thank you, Sydney. You made that up? Yeah. Good, okay, I'm glad you did. Thank you, great. Next we have Casey.
This one's called Placeholder. Let me eat your heart, he said. Let me swallow you whole in my bed. There's a time and a place whenever you want, because if you got it, you should flaunt. Everything's sexualized, putting up hair, it's in your way. Breaking lace thigh highs, the hole was bothering you. Fish nets are meant to catch predators, they said. Walking, cat called again. Wait till you grow claws and finally rip their skin. Eat their heart, because after all, weren't they asking for it? And then, it's okay if I read one more? Sure. Okay, this one's called He's Green. He's mean, he's green, he's every hue, he's so forgetful with his I love yous. He's like autumn rain, he feels so cold, like prison chains. Looks so good, but feels so mean. The world's against him, so why me? There's nothing wrong, I say. Is there a way to feel okay, I say? Afterwards feels off. I'm never right, but I'm always wrong. Like I said, he's every hue, shines like diamonds and brews like stew. He smells divine, like autumn rain. He tastes of mold. What a startling change.
Boy, this has been fantastic. What a fantastic night. I'm knocked over by these poems. And before we hear the last part, I just wanted to say to you, all of you should submit your poems to Doug Holder for his consideration for the Somerville News. And some of you have done it. And also, some of you English majors, and you don't have to be an English major, should consider having a chapbook published by Doug and myself for the Young Writers Series, as some of you have already done. And finally, last but not least, Joe G.
This is a short story called Death's Witness. Very originally, I'm writing about death and about murder, so. Sometimes you just know when death is lingering. It's the odd chill, the one that runs up your spine like your bones are being traced by the sharp nails of cold fingers. It's the strong breeze, the one that carries voices, whispers down your neck. It's the shadow in the corner of your eye, the one that takes just a little too long to leave. The flash in your reflection, the twitch, is just a little too obvious, like it wants to be seen. Because death wants to be seen. Death wants a witness, and that witness was me. Sometimes we notice things that we shouldn't. Someone trying to hide the red rim of their eyes that screams exactly what they don't want everyone to know. A heated conversation on another person's screen. The sounds behind a closed door. Moments where we know we don't belong. The ones we know we shouldn't have been witness to, the endless wells we saw the bottoms of. That was the permanent state that death put me in. It wasn't meant to be cruel, but that's what the truth is. It's learning a little too soon the ugly things we wish we could immediately forget, the things we can't negotiate with. But there's something so irresistible about it. The things we shouldn't see, shouldn't do, the bad habits we don't want to kick. Sometimes we are nothing more than insects that flock to a bowl of rotting fruit. nothing more than maggots that feast on decay. Maybe we're just scared of the darkness because we know we cannot resist it. Maybe we fear death because we know we would welcome it. It started with my sister. She had always been sick, and not just in the literal sense. Everyone knew she would kick the bucket someday, but I didn't quite expect the bucket to be the ceiling fan in the bedroom we shared. Note to self, don't leave the fan mode on before turning on the light. Her ghost came in the form of her floating figure that swayed against the moonlit window. She was 13, and I saw something following her for 3 days before she was hanged. I guess I knew it was going to happen, but how does a 10-year-old tell their parents that she can see death clinging to others like a needy child? When you're a child, you don't know the weight of these things, but you know that they're too heavy to move. And a part of me liked it, my little secret, the fly to the fruit. Next was my mother. I suppose it's not surprising that a mother would follow her child into the afterlife when you have no control of the fact that it should be the other way around. Note to self, if a door is too heavy to pull open, it's probably because there is a body attached to it. I suppose I could have warned her too when I saw the shadow from my sister's limp body move to her shaking one. But like I said, these things are non-negotiable. Once that call to the darkness becomes irresistible, these things are inevitable, like maggots on a body. Then it was a middle school classmate, a hit and run, according to the gossip. It was all said to be very messy. The scene and the blame and the court and the grief and the limbs and the blood all over my hands, I couldn't wake him up. Then it was a not so close friend. They never were very good at swimming. Then it was a great something or other, heart attack apparently, a friend of a friend, house fire, the boy in the newspaper, murdered, neighbor, poisoned, dead, exsanguination, heartache, accidents, immolation, victims drowned, asphyxia, trauma, defenestration, infanticide, starvation. You learn a lot of ways to die when you're surrounded by more death than life. At some point, I figured that it was strange, having witnessed so many lives taken. I started to wonder if I was the only one who wouldn't ever know what it felt like. Everything I touched died, and I don't just mean that in the metaphorical sense. All these people I met, written and crossed off like some sort of checklist, and my box is still empty. Turns out I had no box. I wasn't even on the list. I created the list. Death begged me to bear witness, and there couldn't be a witness without a crime. Without a body, there are no maggots. I was the sounds behind the wood and the innocent child at the door. I suppose I had to get caught it someday. Note to self, it only takes a few days for a body to start to smell. The last crime I could commit, and the one death I couldn't witness. Congrats to self, I didn't leave the fan mode on this time.
Non-negotiable, yes, yes. Georgie, that story, I've told you this before, it takes no prisoners. Thank you, everybody. This has been a great night, a really, really wonderful night. And thank you all for coming and sticking around. And we're going to do this again. And we're going to do something. I also would like you all to join the Endicott Review as editors. It would be fantastic, especially as this year and next year and as the years go by. And then we're going to have a little holiday party sponsored by the Endicott Review. And it's December 4th. At 7 o'clock, but I'll be giving you yes, 7th. It wasn't the 4th, it was 7th. But I'll be giving this to my classes and we'll be putting this around campus. So I hope you can all come to do that, and we'll continue and read. You could tell holiday stories and holiday poems, and they can be dark. They can be dark. Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you to all the veterans and to the Native American Indians in the spirit world. Thank you. And on Earth, too. Thank you, everybody.